Hercule Poirot chronicles the haunted aviary escape. Chapter 1. A cry in the aviary. There are few sounds in the English countryside more charming than the early morning song of birds, but on the misty grounds of Larchmoor Estate, that gentle harmony was shattered by a scream so sharp it startled even the weathered oaks from their sleep. The aviary stood alone at the edge of the estate gardens, an ornate glass dome adorned with curling ironwork and ancient vines. Inside, rare birds of every hue and origin danced among brass cages and twisted branches, cerulean parrots from Brazil, ghost white doves from Persia, and an elusive African turako, Lady Evelina claimed had once perched on a Maharaja's shoulder. That morning the birds didn't sing, they shrieked. The first to reach the scene was Mrs. Templeton, the housekeeper, her footsteps crunching along the gravel path. She would later swear the moment she unlocked the aviary door, a cold gust swept past her, unnatural and bitter, as if something not of this world had fled. Lady Evelina Fortescue lay sprawled beneath the upper platform, her limbs at awkward angles. A pool of crimson bloomed across her robe like a wilting camellia. A shattered golden birdcage lay beside her, its occupant gone. No one spoke of it at first, but it was known. The Fabergé finch that had always sat proudly on its velvet perch was missing. It was Cordelia Vaughan, her niece, who raised the alarm, her voice trembling as she gripped the edge of the drawing-room door. Within hours, the news had spread. The Lady of Larchmoor was dead. The local constable, a nervous sort, with ink-stained fingers and a soft spot for marmalade buns, arrived before noon. He poked about the scene, mumbling theories about missteps and accidents, and even the possibility of a stroke, but Cordelia stood firm. "My aunt never stepped above the lower rails," she said, voice hardening. "She had vertigo. Even the sight of the aviary stairs made her dizzy." To deepen the mystery, the estate's valet, Mr. Farley, spoke of a figure he had glimpsed on the upper platform moments after the birds fell silent. "A shadow," he muttered, standing still, watching. The inquest was postponed. The guests were advised not to leave. And beneath the glass dome, a legend was reawakened, the tale of the haunted aviary, whispered since the Victorian era, when a governess had entered alone and was never seen again, save for the feathers that appeared in her empty shoes the next day. The will, recently altered. The Fabergé finch, stolen. A woman afraid of heights, dead beneath the staircase, and 5 people with reasons to remain silent. Cordelia Vaughan, the dutiful niece with a musical past. Mr. Horace Wilton, the solicitor whose briefcase always rattled. Miss Theodora Kent, the peculiar bird scholar who spoke to macaws as if they were men. Major Felix Winter, once a suitor, now a soldier in retreat. Reverend Giles Harrow, whose silence said more than his sermons. Cordelia, desperate for clarity and justice, penned a letter that same evening. The man she wrote to was in London. Small of stature but immense of intellect, he was enjoying a pot of rich chocolate at his preferred Mayfair café and carefully trimming the edges of Le Soir with a golden letter opener when the courier arrived. The envelope bore a crest. The contents intrigued him. "An aviary," murmured Monsieur Hercule Poirot. "And the birds, they scream? That is most unnatural. Birds do not lie, mon ami. They only repeat what they hear." He folded the letter and placed it beside his saucer with a gentle tap. "Murder has wings," he said to no one in particular. "And where wings flutter, secrets nest." By morning he was on the first train to Derbyshire, his valise neatly packed, his moustaches impeccable. And so began a most singular case of stolen treasure, shattered trust, and murder among feathers. Chapter 2. The Lady and the Locked Door. The following morning, a thick veil of fog hung low across the Larchmore grounds, as though the earth itself wished to conceal what had transpired within the aviary. The manor was quiet, too quiet. Even the birds, usually bursting into song at dawn, seemed subdued, their chirps muffled behind layers of mist and glass. Inside the manor, Cordelia Vaughan sat stiffly in the morning room, her teacup untouched, her posture as precise as her expression was strained. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight chignon, as if she had willed herself into control. Across from her, Major Felix Winter paced restlessly before the unlit hearth, his military boots scuffing against the Persian rug. "She didn't fall," Cordelia said suddenly, not for the first time. "You know it, don't you?" Winter paused, arms behind his back. He was a man in his 60s, once broad-shouldered, now softened at the edges. His gaze flicked to the tall windows, then to her. "Evelina was difficult," he said at last, "but not reckless." "She was frightened yesterday," Cordelia continued, her voice lowered. "Before luncheon, she told me someone had been tampering with her display cases. The bird figurines, she said one was moved. And yet she said nothing to me." The Major frowned. "We played chess last evening. She was in fine spirits." "You forget, Major," came a voice from the hallway. Lady Evelina rarely showed the same face to more than one person. It was Horace Wilton, the family solicitor, entering with his usual stiffness. He carried a small leather folder tucked under one arm and wore a mourning cravat that looked altogether too rehearsed. He offered Cordelia a curt nod, then addressed the room at large. "I must inform you both that the coroner's office has requested the estate be kept sealed until further notice. That includes the aviary. No one is to enter until an official conclusion is reached." Cordelia's eyes narrowed. An official conclusion based on what? The constable's guesswork? I found her brooch halfway across the floor, and the Finch, her Fabergé piece, is gone. Wilton cleared his throat. "We mustn't speculate. The circumstances are unusual, yes, but accidents do occur, Miss Vaughan." "That particular brooch was pinned to her robe," she said coldly. "There's no way it ended up on the far side of the room unless someone yanked it." Before Wilton could respond, a new voice interrupted. "Pardon me," said Mrs. Templeton, entering briskly, "but I've just finished checking the inventories again. It's not just the Fabergé bird that's gone." Everyone turned. "Lady Evelina's lapis ring is missing too," she continued, "the one she wore on her right hand. The ruby-studded one from India. It's not in her jewellery box nor on her body." Winter exhaled slowly. "So we now have a vanished heirloom, a valuable figurine, and a ring, all gone on the very morning she dies under suspicious circumstances?" Wilton adjusted his cuffs. "Let's not leap to conclusions. Robbery and death do not always share a room." Cordelia stood. "But they often do when there's a will involved. Isn't that right, Mr. Wilton?" The solicitor said nothing, but a muscle twitched at his temple. Just then a sharp knock echoed from the front hall. Mrs. Templeton hesitated. "I wasn't expecting anyone." Another knock, firmer, deliberate. Cordelia glanced toward the clock. "It's too early for deliveries. Who would be calling at this hour?" She moved quickly through the corridor, the others following close behind, and flung open the oak door. There he stood, small, fastidious, with a moustache so perfectly waxed it could have passed for sculpture. Dressed in a trim grey suit with ivory gloves and a cane of dark ebony, Monsieur Hercule Poirot inclined his head with gentle formality. "Mademoiselle Vaughan," he said, his French accent curling every syllable like silk ribbon. "You wrote to me. You spoke of death, of secrets, and of a crime most curious. May I come in? Cordelia exhaled in relief. Thank you for coming, Monsieur Poirot. We need you more than you know. Poirot stepped across the threshold and paused, letting his eyes wander with precise intent. His gaze flicked to the corner rugs, the scuff marks along the wood, the faint imprint of an umbrella tip near the console table. "And I see," he said softly, "that someone has already tried to erase the truth." Wilton cleared his throat. "Monsieur Poirot, I'm afraid the constable may not approve of outside investigators meddling in—" "Ah, but I'm not here to meddle, monsieur," Poirot said, smiling thinly. "I am here only to observe, to listen, and to ask the questions others may have overlooked." He glanced up the stairs, then toward the conservatory. "And I shall start," he added, "with the birds." Cordelia blinked. "The birds?" "Mais oui," Poirot replied. "They are witnesses, mademoiselle, witnesses who saw everything and forgot nothing." Chapter 3. The Gathering of Shadows. By late afternoon, Larchmore Manor had taken on the air of a theatre before curtain, hushed voices, darting glances, and the quiet sense that something irreversible had already occurred. Poirot, ever the director in such productions, had taken it upon himself to request that all those staying at the estate gather in the drawing-room before sunset. "I prefer," he explained gently to Mrs. Templeton, "to see my suspects not in their native corners where they act the part, but together, for in company people reveal more than they intend. The drawing-room, a grand affair with gilded cornices and tapestries faded to soft rose hues, was soon populated by a most curious assembly. Cordelia Vaughan stood near the fireplace, pale but composed, her hands clasped behind her back. She nodded briefly to Poirot as he entered, before returning her gaze to the window, as if watching for something or someone. Major Felix Winter occupied the high-backed leather chair by the chess table, arms crossed and jaw tight. He looked as though he would rather be facing artillery than questions. Miss Theodora Kent, the ornithologist guest, perched on the edge of the settee like one of her own birds, narrow, wiry, and brimming with quiet intensity. Her clothes were practical but eccentric, a heavy linen skirt, mismatched gloves, and a green velvet scarf embroidered with tiny birds in flight. She had barely blinked since Poirot entered the room. Reverend Giles Harrow stood near the bookshelves, fingering a well-worn Bible. Though he appeared calm, Poirot noted the slight tremor in his fingers as he turned the pages. His eyes, when they lifted, seemed to search each face for hidden sins. And finally, Horace Wilton arrived last, his leather folder tucked once more beneath his arm. He gave a faint smile to no one in particular and took a seat, legs crossed neatly. Poirot cleared his throat and took centre stage. "Mes amis," he began, spreading his hands, "please forgive my intrusion in your affairs. I come at the request of Mademoiselle Vaughan, and I come with the greatest discretion." He let the silence settle before continuing. "I understand Lady Evelina's passing has been declared an unfortunate accident, but there are, I suspect, too many peculiarities for comfort. A missing artifact, a prized ring that vanishes, a body found in a place she feared to tread." Theodora Kent's head tilted slightly. Surely the birds would have made noise if someone else entered the aviary before she did. Poirot smiled politely. "They did. Mademoiselle Cordelia tells me the birds screamed. That is not the reaction to a friend, no, that is the panic of prey." There was a quiet ripple through the room. Reverend Harrow broke the silence. "With all due respect, monsieur." "Poirot, are you suggesting that someone here is responsible for Evelina's death?" Poirot did not answer directly.
Instead, he turned to Cordelia. "Mademoiselle, would you kindly remind me who was present at the estate on the morning of Lady Evelina's death?" Cordelia stepped forward. "Myself, of course, Mrs. Templeton, Major Winter, Miss Kent, Reverend Harrow. Mr. Wilton had arrived the evening before, though he was expected later in the week." "I had urgent documents," Wilton interjected smoothly. "Evelina asked me to come early." Poirot nodded as if he'd expected as much. "Bien. A closed circle, then. No strangers, no staff beyond the permanent household. And all of you had access to the aviary at some point in the morning, did you not?" The air turned noticeably cooler. Major Winter let out a dry chuckle. "You make it sound like a parlor game." "Non," Poirot said softly. "This is no game, monsieur. It is a matter of death and, perhaps, of justice." He moved to the fireplace, his reflection dancing in the polished marble. "Tell me, does anyone know whether Lady Evelina had visitors in the week prior to her death? Any messages? Unusual activity?" Theodora cleared her throat. "There was a man, he came 3 days ago. Said he was an antique birdcage appraiser. Spoke to Evelina privately. I assumed she'd called him." Cordelia frowned. "She didn't mention anything to me about that." Poirot looked intrigued. "Did this gentleman leave his name?" "No," Theodora said, "but he carried a silver-tipped cane with a handle shaped like a hawk's head. I remember that distinctly. Odd detail to forget." "Indeed," murmured Poirot. Wilton shifted in his seat. "I believe we're getting distracted. If Evelina was murdered, it would have to be someone with intimate knowledge of the house, of her habits, of the aviary." Poirot turned, eyes gleaming. "Exactly, monsieur, and that is why I must speak to each of you, privately, this evening." The group began to murmur, but Poirot held up a hand. In matters such as these, even the smallest inconsistency can betray a lie, a gesture, a word, a glance. It is in these small things that truth hides. He bowed his head slightly. "Until then, I ask you all not to leave the premises." He paused. "Even the birds, they remain in their cage." Chapter 4. The Watchers in the Glass. The late autumn sun was beginning its descent when Hercule Poirot stepped into the aviary for the first time. It was precisely as Cordelia had described, an ornate glass structure with delicate iron arches, polished stone flooring, and dozens of brass cages, some open, some locked. The scent was peculiar, citrus from the orange trees interspersed with the faint, musty odor of feathers and something harder to place. Something metallic, perhaps. Poirot moved slowly, allowing his senses to adjust. The birds, unsettled by the sudden presence of a stranger, flitted anxiously. A pale cockatoo let out a shrill cry, then settled on a perch and watched him with uncanny stillness. Poirot did not approach the body's location directly. He never did. Instead, he allowed himself to move through the space in a spiral, noticing details others might overlook. A small ribbon snagged on a branch, a pair of crushed sunflower seeds near the central platform, a faint shoe scuff at the base of the spiral staircase leading to the upper catwalk. "Mon ami," he whispered aloud, "you are not an accident. No, you are too, how shall I say it, curated." He looked up. From below, the iron staircase seemed benign, but he noted the pattern of its steps, 5 of them. Then a small platform. Then 3 more leading to the upper walkway, each narrow, each treacherous. He walked toward the railing where Evelina had been found. A single bloodstain remained, half cleaned but still visible if one knew where to look. Beside it, a golden clasp, bent slightly out of shape, glimmered among the tiles. Poirot knelt and examined it with a small magnifier he drew from his vest. Not a brooch. A clasp, like one used to fasten a decorative chain.
but not one attached to the robe Cordelia had described. This was different. He pocketed it and continued his survey. As he stood, a reflection in the glass startled him. A silhouette. He turned. Miss Theodora Kent stood just outside the aviary doors, watching him with unreadable eyes. She didn't flinch when their eyes met. Instead, she stepped inside, hands folded in front of her. "Apologies," she said. "I was feeding the birds earlier. I thought I might find you here." Poirot smiled thinly. "Mademoiselle Kent, you are devoted to them, yes?" "To the birds?" "Entirely. They were Lady Evelina's greatest joy. She spared no expense. The scarlet macaw alone was imported illegally, you know. She took pride in collecting what others couldn't acquire." Poirot stepped closer to the central perch. "And now the collection is diminished? Because of the Fabergé finch?" Her tone was clipped. "Yes, she kept it here, in the cage by the fountain. I always thought it odd, placing such a thing among living birds. But she said it made them sing louder." "Do you believe it was stolen the same morning?" "Of course," Theodora replied too quickly. "Unless someone took it days before and she never noticed. But I find that unlikely. She checked on it constantly." Poirot tilted his head. "And you, mademoiselle? Where were you the morning Lady Evelina died?" "I was in the south garden cataloguing the parakeets," she said calmly. "Ask Mrs. Templeton. She saw me near the greenhouse around 9. I only entered the aviary after the scream." Poirot noted the phrasing. After the scream. "Did you see anything unusual?" She hesitated. "Yes," she said at last. "A cage door. It was open." "The one that held the kingfisher?" Poirot's eyebrow lifted. "And the bird?" "Still inside," she said. Shaken. Terrified. Poirot folded his hands. "You believe in fear, mademoiselle?" Theodora looked at him sharply. "I study animal behavior. Birds remember trauma. They mimic it, echo it." "And humans?" Her voice lowered. "They conceal it, even from themselves." She turned then and left the aviary without another word. Poirot remained for a moment longer, his eyes tracing the shifting shadows against the glass. The late light created strange illusions, reflections within reflections. Someone could easily be standing above, or below, or just behind the pane, and you might never know. He finally stepped out and made his way back to the manor, where Cordelia awaited him in the library. "You found something?" she said as he entered. Poirot nodded. "I always find something, mademoiselle. The question is, do others lose things on purpose?" He sat beside her. "Tell me, who else knew about the will being changed?" Cordelia blinked. "Only myself, and Mr. Wilton. She called him last week to make the adjustments. She didn't tell me the details, only that she was cutting someone out." "Someone who expected to inherit," Poirot mused. "And did not." He leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Mademoiselle Cordelia, I must speak with the good Reverend next. There is something in his eyes that is too clean, like polished glass hiding a cracked pane behind." She swallowed. "Do you think one of them did it?" Poirot stood, adjusting his cuffs. "Chérie, they all had cause, but only one had opportunity, motive, and the courage to face the birds." Chapter 5. The Reverend and the Ring. The chapel at Larchmore Manor was a modest affair, stone-floored, ivy-kissed, with a single stained-glass window that filtered the late afternoon light into shards of ruby and emerald. It was here that Poirot found Reverend Giles Harrow, seated in the front pew, back straight, hands folded, a silent sentinel among shadows. The scent of beeswax and old paper clung to the air. A brass candlestick burned low beside the altar, its flame flickering, uncertain. Poirot approached with gentle steps, the soft tap of his patent leather shoes muffled by the age-worn rug. "Reverend," he said, bowing slightly, "you do not mind, I hope? I come not to confess, but to inquire." The Reverend smiled faintly without turning. "There's peace here, Monsieur Poirot. I find it preferable to drawing-rooms and suspicions." Poirot sat beside him. "Understandable. Suspicion, like smoke, clings to curtains and reputations alike." A silence passed between them, not strained, but contemplative. "I imagine," Poirot began softly, "you knew Lady Evelina for some time." "Since I came to Larchmoor 5 years ago," Harrow replied. "She was complex, proud, not without generosity, but it came wrapped in thorns." Poirot nodded. "And did she confide in you?"
On occasion, when it suited her. She was not a woman who trusted easily, or forgave easily either. Poirot turned his gaze toward the stained glass, a dove held aloft by a glowing hand. "She amended her will," he said after a pause. "Did she speak to you about it?" The Reverend hesitated. "Not directly," he said, "but I suspected. She was troubled lately, more than usual, restless, perhaps even afraid." "Afraid of what?" Harrow's brow furrowed. "Not of someone, of something, a consequence perhaps, a secret she had kept too long." Poirot's expression sharpened. "And this secret, do you think it was connected to her death?" Another pause. "I think," Harrow said slowly, "that guilt weighs heavier with age. She was burdened. She said once, only once, that she had taken something that did not belong to her." Poirot raised a brow. "Stolen?" Harrow looked at him. "I asked. She said no, but I never fully believed her." Poirot tapped a finger against his knee. "Reverend, may I ask, where were you between 9 and 10 the morning Lady Evelina died?" "In the study, preparing Sunday's homily. Mrs. Templeton can vouch. I asked her to find a particular hymn book from the cellar archive. She returned around 10. "Did you see anyone go toward the aviary?" Harrow shook his head. "Only Miss Kent in the garden, and Mr. Wilton walking briskly from the west wing. No one else." Poirot was silent a moment, then reached into his coat and produced the bent clasp he had found. "Do you recognize this?" Harrow took it carefully, studied it. "Yes, it's from a rosary, a very old one. She used to keep it in her bedroom drawer. Said it belonged to her grandmother." Poirot leaned closer. "And yet, it was found beneath her body, near the shattered cage." The Reverend blinked. "Then, she must have had it with her, that morning." Poirot gave a small smile. "Yes, or someone else did." He rose. "One last question, monsieur. The missing ring, do you know of it?" Harrow looked puzzled. "The lapis ring." Poirot nodded. "She never wore it often, but she once said it was cursed. A tale, I thought. Something about the man who gave it to her. I asked if he was dead. She said worse. Forgotten." Poirot's gaze lingered. "Thank you, Reverend. You have given me much to think about." He turned, then paused at the door. "One does not often find faith and fear sharing space," Poirot said gently. "But here at Larchmoor, they seem very much acquainted." Poirot returned to the manor just as the first fingers of twilight curled over the estate. A slight wind had picked up, rattling the windows and rustling the trees. Somewhere in the aviary, a bird let out a solitary trill, a sad, stretched note that seemed to echo through the halls. In the drawing-room, Cordelia was seated near the fire with a decanter of sherry and 2 glasses. She poured one silently and passed it to Poirot as he entered. "You look like you've aged 10 years, she said. "Non," Poirot replied. "Only 5. The other 5 I have merely stored away for later." She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You've spoken to the Reverend?" Poirot sipped.
He gave me a clasp, a story, and a question I did not expect. Cordelia tilted her head. What question? Poirot looked at the fire. What it means to be forgotten. There was a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Templeton entered. Pardon, Miss Cordelia, but something's happened. She stepped in fully, holding out a folded scrap of parchment. We found this on the aviary's outer window ledge, slipped behind the ivy. It's a piece of Lady Evelina's stationery. Poirot opened it. Scrawled in trembling ink a single line. He saw the cage open from above. Chapter 6. A Trap Among the Branches. The note lay between Poirot's fingers like something too fragile to breathe on. The handwriting, shaky, hurried, bore none of the elegance Cordelia recalled from her aunt's usual correspondence. It was unmistakably Lady Evelina's hand, but stripped of its former grandeur, as if written in fear or haste. He saw the cage open from above. Poirot read the line again, lips pressed thin. "Do you recognize this paper?" he asked, turning to Cordelia. She nodded slowly. From her writing desk, she kept a stack in the drawer, along with her fountain pens and sealing wax. "Then it was not a random scrap," Poirot said. "She intended it to be found. The question is, by whom?" Mrs. Templeton shifted uneasily by the doorway. "It wasn't there yesterday. I sweep that ledge daily to keep the ivy from overtaking the glass." Poirot narrowed his eyes. "Which means it was planted. Recently? Perhaps even after her death." Cordelia's face paled. "You mean someone is trying to simulate a message from her?" "Or conceal one," Poirot said softly. "The act of hiding a message is always a choice, sometimes meant for protection, and sometimes for manipulation." He folded the parchment carefully and tucked it into his inner pocket. "Come," he said suddenly. "We are going for a walk." The garden paths around the aviary were damp with dew, the hedges brushed with gold from the setting sun. Poirot led Cordelia toward the iron stairs that spiraled up to the second level of the glass dome. They were narrow, barely wide enough for a single foot, and steep enough to require a hand on the rail. Cordelia hesitated at the base. She would never have climbed these. "I do not believe she did," Poirot agreed, "but someone else did." He gestured for her to wait and climbed slowly, deliberately, each footstep echoing against the iron. At the top, he paused on the catwalk that circled the upper perimeter of the dome. The height was dizzying, not a place for someone who feared falling. The glass above his head bore faint smudges. He crouched and examined the metal latch of a cage bolted into the far railing. It was open, just slightly, and the hinge showed recent scratches, as though it had been wrenched too hard. Below, the cage lay shattered on the floor. The same cage was found near Evelina's body. From this height, Poirot could see everything: the mosaic tiles, the placement of the central perch, and most importantly, the trajectory of a fall from the railing. The angle would match Evelina's position exactly. He could even imagine the scene: a struggle, a scream, then silence. He descended slowly, and Cordelia met his gaze with quiet apprehension. "Well?" she asked. "She was pushed," Poirot said simply. "From above." Cordelia swallowed. "So, the note was real?" Poirot's brow furrowed. "That, mademoiselle, is where things become interesting, because whoever saw the cage open from above was not Lady Evelina." Her confusion deepened. Poirot elaborated. "You see, had she written that line herself, she would have said, 'I saw the cage open,' not he. It suggests a witness. Someone else, possibly someone she spoke with before she died, or someone who confessed something to her." Cordelia's eyes widened. "Then why would the note be on her paper?" "That," Poirot said, "is what makes it clever. The forger wanted it to appear authentic, but in mimicking her handwriting, they made an error in voice. They reached the edge of the garden where a small, moss-covered bench stood nestled beneath a weeping willow. Poirot sat with a sigh. "Let us consider motives again," he said. "We know there was a will. We know someone was excluded. We also know there is theft of the Fabergé finch, the lapis ring, and now, perhaps, of a letter meant to expose a truth." Cordelia frowned. "You think someone is staging this to frame someone else?" "Ah," Poirot said, pointing a finger. "Or to protect themselves. What is most dangerous in a crime, mademoiselle? It is not always the act. It is the risk of discovery, blackmail, secrets, scandal. They turn people into actors, improvisers, and occasionally murderers." He stood. "I must speak to Mr. Wilton next," he said. "Our meticulous solicitor has a penchant for altering timelines and wills." Mr. Horace Wilton was found in the Manor's reading lounge, polishing his spectacles and pretending to browse a book on European estate law. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," he said, not looking up. "I suspected you'd come calling." Poirot sat across from him without invitation. "And I suspected you would have answers prepared." Wilton smiled. "Always." Poirot withdrew the note and unfolded it. "You recognize this, of course?" Wilton peered at it with academic detachment. "Lady Evelina's stationery. But the handwriting shaky. Hard to say if it's hers. But it is convenient, n'est-ce pas, to appear now, implicating a he, an
unseen observer?" Wilton met Poirot's gaze. "Do you think it was planted?" Poirot said nothing, but the air grew dense. Wilton placed his spectacles on the table. "Look, Lady Evelina made enemies in her time. She had a sharp tongue and a sharper mind, but she also kept ledgers, diaries. I saw her burning pages 2 days before her death." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You saw her burning them?" Wilton hesitated. "Or someone with her silhouette. Through the window. It was raining that day, hard to say." Poirot stood. "You see, Mr. Wilton? Memory can be cloudy in the rain, but lies, they are always dry." He bowed slightly. "I shall be in the study this evening. If you recall anything, do let me know." As Poirot left, Wilton watched him go, fingers tapping slowly on the table in a rhythm that didn't match any known hymn. Chapter 7. A Flicker at the Window. The aviary loomed dark against the indigo sky. It had an uncanny quality in the evening, the glass panes catching slivers of moonlight, refracting them into odd, ghost-like streaks. The estate had grown quiet since Poirot's conversation with Mr. Wilton, but silence in a place so thick with secrets was never truly silent. Poirot, alone now, stood by the drawing-room hearth. A soft fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across the bookshelves and the antique armchairs. He had taken his time reviewing his notes, eyes narrowed at each inconsistency, each name that circled back like a vulture to the same carcass of motive. His fingers tapped a rhythm of thought on the armrest. The note found in the aviary. The witness, unseen but implied. The open cage, forced from above. A will no one had yet seen. And a solicitor who remembered silhouettes in the rain. It was time to test something. He rose, moving to the study, and left the door slightly ajar. Then, from the desk drawer, he produced a sheet of writing paper, identical to Lady Evelina's, and an ink pen. With delicate precision, he wrote one line on the paper. "I saw who took the Fabergé bird." He folded it once, loosely, and placed it on the edge of the desk. Then he turned down the study lamp to a dim glow and positioned the chair so it faced away from the window, just enough to suggest someone might be there. Dozing, inattentive. And then Poirot left the room.
Silently, he moved across the corridor, slipped behind the heavy brocade curtain outside the reading lounge, and waited. It was a game of patience. The hallway grandfather clock ticked with solemn beats. 15 minutes passed. 30. Then a sound, faint, a step. Poirot's breath slowed. The hallway, dimly lit by wall sconces, revealed the shadow of a figure just as it turned the corner toward the study. Poirot saw the silhouette pause at the door, hesitate, then enter. He waited 2 seconds more and followed. The study door creaked slightly as he pushed it open. The figure froze, its hand halfway to the note. "Bonsoir," Poirot said quietly. The intruder turned. It was Miss Iona Greaves. She was startled but composed, one hand on the edge of the desk, the other hiding behind her back. "Monsieur Poirot," she said quickly, I thought this room was empty." "You saw the chair and the lamp and believed it was unoccupied?" His eyebrow lifted. She swallowed. "I was only looking for something of mine. I thought I'd left my diary here yesterday morning." Poirot moved slowly into the room. "May I see what you have behind your back, mademoiselle?" She hesitated. A long beat of silence. Finally, she revealed her hand. It was empty. Her palm trembled slightly. "I dropped it outside the door," she murmured. Poirot walked past her and retrieved the paper from the hallway carpet. The note lay face up. "I saw who took the Fabergé bird." He returned it to the desk. "You were not curious, I imagine?" he asked dryly. Iona looked down. "Only surprised, monsieur." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "You are an observant woman. You were Lady Evelina's companion, more than a secretary. You knew her moods, her fears, her suspicions." Her voice stiffened. "She trusted me." "Yes," Poirot agreed. "Enough to keep you close during her last days. Enough, perhaps, to confide certain dangerous thoughts?" Iona blinked. "What are you suggesting?" Poirot said nothing at first. He looked at the fire. Now, nothing more than ember glow. "Tell me, mademoiselle," he said quietly, "did Lady Evelina ever speak of fearing someone in the house?" Iona looked caught off guard, but her reply was swift. "She was always afraid of being taken advantage of. She thought everyone wanted something from her. Lately, she'd grown more erratic, locked her bedroom at night, hide things. I think she was scared, but she would never tell me about them." Poirot nodded again. He noticed how her eyes flicked once toward the corner of the room, toward the low cabinet where the aviary blueprints had been stored earlier that week. "Thank you, Mademoiselle Greaves," he said, rising. "That will be all for tonight." Iona nodded quickly and exited the room, leaving Poirot with the soft hush of old paper and unanswered questions. Later that night, in the guest chambers of the West Wing, Poirot penned a brief entry into his notebook. Iona Greaves, intelligent, controlled, knows more than she reveals. She hesitates near the truth. She is watching the others, not out of fear, but calculation. He closed the book, then moved to the window. The aviary, just visible beyond the gardens, flickered with ghostly moonlight. As he turned to retreat for the night, a light blinked once, briefly, in the upper floor of the aviary. A lantern, a signal. Someone was inside, and it was well past midnight. Poirot reached for his coat and slippers. It was not over. Not yet. Chapter 8. The Silent Witness. Moonlight paved a pale path across the garden lawn as Poirot stepped out into the chilled night air. His polished shoes crunched softly against gravel, and the wind carried a faint rustle from the trees like whispers in the dark. But his eyes remained fixed on the source of his growing curiosity. A dim, flickering light that had blinked once, maybe twice, from the upper floor of the aviary. It was no illusion. Someone had been there. Lanterns should not move on their own, and certainly not in locked buildings long after midnight. The key to the aviary, he had learned earlier from Mr. Wilton, was held by only two people, Lady Evelina when she was alive, and now, ostensibly, her solicitor. Yet here was activity inside after hours while the household slept, or pretended to. Poirot's steps grew cautious as he reached the narrow gate leading into the rear conservatory, which backed against the glass aviary structure. The wrought iron latch gave a soft click, and he slipped through. All was still now. No lantern, no footsteps, only the reflective silence of moonlight catching the aviary's dome. Poirot circled quietly, noting the fine layer of moss growing along the edge of the structure. He paused by the servant entrance, a small, seldom-used door near the base of the building. He tested the handle. It turned, unlocked. With a soft breath, Poirot entered. The aviary greeted him with a strange scent, earthy, musky, slightly sweet. The scent of bird feed, old wood, and damp feathers. Shadows danced on the high glass ceiling, and the empty cages gave off a metallic gleam in the dim moonlight filtering through. Then he saw it. A faint glow ahead, not a lantern, a candle, set carefully on a low perch beside an open cage, the same cage that had once housed the Fabergé bird. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He approached slowly. The cage had not been tampered with again, but there were fresh scuff marks on the wooden floor below. And something else, a scrap of deep burgundy fabric caught on the cage latch. A sleeve? A glove? Poirot took the scrap carefully and tucked it into his pocket. The candle's flicker danced along the far wall, illuminating the edge of a small metal cabinet built into the structure's base. Poirot approached it. The cabinet was ajar. Inside, a stack of papers, old feeding logs, and at the back, a leather-bound journal. He reached for it. Suddenly a sound, a sharp breath. Poirot turned. A figure had entered behind him, silent as a ghost, tall, thin, shoulders hunched in surprise. The face, briefly illuminated, was pale with recognition and dread. "Mr. Cavendish," Poirot said coolly. The housekeeper's husband stood frozen, one hand behind his back, the other trembling slightly. "I did not expect company, monsieur," Poirot continued. "Not at such an hour." Cavendish swallowed, his eyes darting toward the candle. I couldn't sleep. I often walk at night. The aviary was open? A curious place to stroll, especially for one
Not given permission to enter, Poirot observed. Cavendish opened his mouth, then hesitated. Poirot's voice remained level, but firm. "What were you hoping to find in here, monsieur? Or perhaps, what were you hoping to remove?" "I found the door ajar," he insisted. "I came to close it." "Ah," said Poirot softly. "A good Samaritan." He gestured to the cabinet behind him. "And the cabinet? The candle conveniently placed? The missing page from this journal?" Cavendish's eyes widened. "There's no page missing." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You speak very quickly for a man unsure of what he saw." There was a long silence. Then Cavendish took a deep breath and dropped his shoulders. "I used to maintain the aviary," he said at last. "Years ago, before she stopped trusting me. Lady Evelina believed I'd stolen feed stock. I hadn't. But she took the key from me, still. I remembered the old access door. It hasn't worked in years, but I checked tonight. It had been oiled, recently." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And you did not oil it?" Cavendish shook his head. Poirot stepped closer. "Did you see anyone here, before me?" "I saw a shadow moving. Up there." He pointed toward the iron spiral staircase leading to the viewing platform above. "But I was afraid to go up." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Fear, monsieur, can preserve life, or hinder truth. He turned his gaze back to the open cabinet. His fingers touched the spine of the journal again. Did Lady Evelina ever write anything important in this? Cavendish hesitated. It was her ledger for birds and secrets. She used symbols, made up her own codes. No one understood it but her. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Then I must try. He lifted the journal gently from the shelf and closed the cabinet door. The candle flickered as if in warning. We shall speak again, Mr. Cavendish. For now, I advise you, do not walk in shadows without purpose. Poirot stepped past him and out into the moonlight. Behind him, the aviary stood once more in silence, its glass panes reflecting nothing but secrets. Chapter 9. Whispered Codes and Missing Pages. Back in his guest suite at Renfield Hall, Hercule Poirot sat with military precision, the leather-bound journal laid open on the writing desk before him. The candlelight flickered, casting tall shadows on the wallpaper, while the wind continued to whisper faintly at the window panes like an unseen hand urging him to go deeper. The journal, once belonging to Lady Evelina, had yielded no straightforward truths. Its pages were penned in meticulous ink, looping and elegant, with dates beside entries that appeared to catalogue birds, but not just their feeding schedules or molting cycles. Odd symbols accompanied each entry, small shapes, stars, circles, the occasional French word inserted without context. Poirot's fingers tapped lightly against the cover as he studied the codes, notations.
Such as, sings only when the moon wanes. Star, watched by eyes not meant to see. Never trust the one who cries too easily. Belle d'Argent visits after snowfall. There were dates missing, entire weeks skipped without explanation, and, most curiously, a torn page, not carelessly torn, but removed with precision, a deliberate absence. It was clear this journal was never intended for open reading. Poirot leaned back in the armchair, folding his arms thoughtfully. If Lady Evelina had secrets, they were not buried in words, but in metaphors, allegories, psychological impressions. A mind like hers, eccentric and elusive, might veil truth in birdsong and omens. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He rose and opened it to find Mrs. Cavendish, pale and breathless. "Mr. Poirot," she said in a hushed voice, "may I come in?" Quickly. Poirot stepped aside. She moved with haste, clutching something to her chest. A small box, worn at the edges. "I shouldn't be here," she said, her voice trembling. "But I found this in my husband's drawer. I don't know what to make of it." Poirot nodded toward the armchair. "Please, madame, sit. Let us consider this calmly." She opened the box slowly. Inside lay a brooch, delicate, silver, shaped like a swallow in flight. In the center, a tiny sapphire was set where the eye would be. "I thought Lady Evelina was buried with all her favourite jewellery," Mrs. Cavendish whispered. "But this was hers. I remember. She wore it the night she fought with her nephew." Poirot's brow lifted. "Mr. Sinclair?" She nodded. "They argued in the drawing-room. I overheard them. She accused him of forging a document. He said she was mad. She struck him with her cane." "Did you see what the document was?" "No. Only that she burned it later that night, in the fire. She said, 'No one will twist my words again.'" Poirot leaned forward. "And yet this brooch, where was it found?" "In an envelope, addressed to someone named Bellamy. My husband said he never saw it before. But I don't believe him." Poirot examined the brooch. It was exquisite, yet the sapphire eye was not quite aligned. He held it to the light. "Ah," he murmured. He pressed lightly on the eye. With a tiny click, the brooch shifted. The swallow's wing flipped up, revealing a curled note tucked inside. Mrs. Cavendish gasped. Poirot carefully withdrew the tiny paper and unrolled it. The handwriting was small but unmistakable, Lady Evelina's. "The gold is not in the vault, but where the bird last slept." "Gold?" Mrs. Cavendish whispered. Poirot folded the note. A metaphor, perhaps, or something more literal. Either way, this message was meant to be hidden from all but one. He placed the brooch and note back in the box and handed it to her. "Keep this for now, madame. Say nothing of it to anyone, not even your husband." Eyes widened. "Do you suspect him?" "I suspect," Poirot said, rising once more. "Everyone, madam, until I no longer need to." She left silently, and Poirot returned to the journal, now more intrigued than ever. The phrase echoed in his mind, "where the bird last slept." What if Lady Evelina's obsession with the aviary had been more than eccentricity? What if it was a labyrinth she designed deliberately to hide something? Not just secrets, but perhaps something of immense value. He turned the journal pages again, searching for entries from the final weeks before her death. And there, on a page dated just 3 days before her fatal fall, he found it. "Belle d'Argent no longer sings. Her cage is too small, and the shadow grows bold. If I fall, let her fly once more." Poirot's lips parted slightly. Belle d'Argent, the silver beauty. Could this refer to the Fabergé bird? He stood and moved to the window, peering out toward the moonlit aviary once more. It was not a flight of fancy. Lady Evelina had known she was in danger, and she had hidden her truths like a songbird behind glass. Chapter 10. Secrets Beneath the Feathers. The following morning dawned grey and overcast, the clouds hanging low over Renfield Hall, as if nature herself mourned the truths buried within its walls. Poirot, immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit with a violet cravat, stood at the aviary's threshold once more, this time in daylight. The light, streaming through the greenhouse glass, played upon the feathers of the taxidermied birds and the cages, some still swinging gently, as though touched by a breeze no one else could feel. He examined the perch marked Belle d'Argent once more, the silver bird gone, her absence a hollow that echoed louder than any presence might have. What had Lady Evelina meant? Let her fly once more? His thoughts were interrupted by approaching footsteps. "Ah, Monsieur Sinclair," Poirot said without turning. "Inspector?" Sinclair's voice betrayed mild irritation. "Not quite, though I dare say I am performing the role far better than any inspector on hand." Sinclair stood beside Poirot, arms crossed, his tailored blazer catching a glint of sun as it broke through the clouds. His expression was carefully guarded. "Lady Evelina's birds meant a great deal to her," Poirot said softly. "Especially this one, the silver beauty." "She was obsessed with that bird," Sinclair said too quickly. "It's hardly surprising she imagined all sorts of meanings in its presence." Poirot turned to face him, tilting his head slightly. "And yet obsession often hides intention, monsieur. I wonder, did you argue with your aunt in the days before her fall?" Sinclair hesitated. "I don't see how that's relevant." "But of course it is," Poirot said gently. "Your aunt's brooch, the swallow with the sapphire eye, has resurfaced." Sinclair's expression tightened. "That's impossible. She was buried with it. I saw the preparations myself." "Curious, then, that it was found in a drawer in your own study." His jaw clenched. "Then someone put it there. That woman, Eleanor, she's always snooping where she shouldn't." "Your wife found it," Poirot corrected softly. "And in the brooch, a hidden note." Written by Lady Evelina Sinclair stepped back, visibly shaken for the first time. "What note?" Poirot stepped closer. A cryptic message, but the implication was clear. Lady Evelina feared someone close to her, feared being silenced. Sinclair met his gaze with narrowed eyes. "You're implying I killed her?" "I imply nothing, monsieur. I observe, I question, I allow the facts to breathe. The truth reveals itself naturally when not suffocated." Poirot gestured to the journal beneath his arm. Her words were strange, yes, but not meaningless. She alluded to someone forging her words, distorting her intentions. A document, perhaps. Sinclair looked away. "She was paranoid, the kindest thing I can say." Poirot remained silent for a moment, then quietly asked, "Where is the will?" Sinclair turned back to him. "What?" "The last will and testament of Lady Evelina, the one she claimed to have rewritten shortly before her death." "There is no such document," Sinclair said flatly. "I was her only surviving heir. It passed legally to me." "But what if she intended otherwise?" Poirot's tone was like velvet, gentle, yet insistent. "Then she should have made it official." Poirot gave a slight nod. "Unless she did, and someone made sure it vanished." Before Sinclair could respond, a shout rang out across the gardens. "Mr. Poirot, you're wanted in the drawing room!" It was Inspector Flitt, red in the face as he jogged up the path. Poirot turned sharply. "What has happened?" "There's been a break-in," Flitt said, panting. "The late Lady Evelina's study. Someone smashed the desk and took documents, possibly old letters or files." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Curious timing, n'est-ce pas? He turned back toward the hall. As he walked away, Sinclair stood frozen by the aviary, his hands clenched into fists. The study was in disarray. Papers littered the floor. The elegant mahogany desk had been broken open with force. Inspector Flitt stood amidst the wreckage, scratching his head. "No sign of forced entry from outside," he muttered. "Must be someone inside the house." Poirot stepped lightly through the room, his eyes taking in every detail. The imprint of muddy boots, the sharp smell of wood, splintered recently, and, near the fireplace, a torn corner of a sealed envelope. He bent to pick it up. "Wax seal," he murmured. "Half melted. Lady Evelina's crest. This envelope was burned quickly, perhaps to hide a signature." Flitt frowned. "Any idea what was inside?" Poirot didn't answer. Instead, he knelt beside the hearth and examined the grate. Charred fragments of parchment lay in a neat pile, not natural disarray, but deliberate burning. He reached for the poker and gently lifted the largest scrap. It bore a single line, still legible: "Hereby revoke any prior statement that names Philip Sinclair sole heir." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Aha," he whispered. "The little grey cells rejoice." Flitt leaned in. "So she did write another will?" "If this was part of one, then yes," Poirot said. "But someone has ensured it cannot be read." He straightened, slipping the fragment into his pocket. "Yet now, mon ami, we know this. The motive grows clearer, and the shadows in Renfield Hall grow bolder by the day." Chapter 11. The smell of ash and guilt. A quiet tension simmered beneath the polished surfaces of Renfield Hall. Though nothing had been said aloud, everyone within its walls felt it. The invisible pressure mounting, the sense that something long buried was preparing to surface. Hercule Poirot took his tea alone in the garden conservatory that afternoon, seated beneath a lattice of creeping roses, watching the house with the eyes of a man who saw far more than he let on. On the wrought-iron table before him lay three objects: a scorched piece of parchment, a photograph of Lady Evelina dated 2 years prior, and a broken porcelain bird, a bluefinch, its painted wing cracked. It was Eleanor who approached him first. "May I sit, Mr. Poirot?" she asked softly. "Mais oui, madame," he said, motioning to the seat opposite. "You bring with you the air of someone burdened." She gave a wan smile. "It's difficult to breathe in this house without stepping into something half-buried." Poirot regarded her closely. "You are not wrong. Renfield Hall has the scent of secrets, more than one." Eleanor folded her hands in her lap, her gaze distant. "I thought perhaps marrying into this family would feel like a step into heritage, tradition. But from the moment I entered, it was like joining a play where everyone already knew their lines, except me." Poirot nodded. "And your husband? Is he the leading actor or a fellow outsider?" Her brow furrowed. "Philip doesn't like to be questioned. He's used to having control." "Oui," Poirot said, "but even the conductor cannot stop the orchestra from playing off-key." He leaned forward slightly. "Madame, you found the brooch, the swallow with the sapphire eye." "Yes," she replied, glancing at the window. "Tucked away beneath old correspondence. I knew at once it didn't belong there." "And the note inside?" I recognized her handwriting. The way she looped her capital G's, it was unmistakable. It frightened me. Poirot studied her. "And yet you kept it to yourself." "I wanted to tell someone, I did. But Philip, he's been so tense lately." He snapped at the housekeeper, screamed at the gardener over
Nothing. I didn't want to provoke him. A wise instinct, but fear, madame, is a poor bodyguard for the truth. A rustle drew their attention. Someone else approaching. It was Charles Mayhew, face flushed, brow beaded with sweat. "Mr. Poirot," he said with a hasty nod, "might I have a word?" Poirot gave Eleanor a gentle nod of dismissal. She rose and left quietly, her silk shawl brushing the petals as she disappeared behind the trellis. Charles sat down heavily. "This house, sir, it's cursed. I've known it since I was a boy." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Superstition does not suit a man with ink on his fingers." "I don't mean ghosts, not exactly. I mean, this family. They've always been at war with each other, but behind lace curtains and civil smiles. Evelina was the only one who seemed decent. And even she—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "You were close? Close enough to know she wanted to change her will? She told me she'd written a new one. I helped her find legal phrasing. Nothing binding, just suggestions." Poirot's interest sharpened. "You drafted language for her. She dictated what she wanted, said she was tired of Philip's entitlement, tired of the legacy of silence. Her words. She planned to leave the majority of her estate to a wildlife conservancy, said she'd had enough of feeding family greed." "And this new will?" Poirot pressed gently. Charles looked pained. "She said she'd finalized it and hidden it somewhere safe until she could notify her solicitor." Poirot gestured to the remnants of the study. "And now?" Charles shook his head. "Gone or burned, like everything else that mattered." Poirot leaned back, silent for a long moment, then said, "She trusted you." "I think she wanted someone to witness her transformation," Charles said. "She'd spent her whole life imprisoned by tradition, by the expectations of Renfield." Poirot rose. "And now the bars of that cage lie open, but not by choice." He walked slowly toward the house. The scent of scorched wood still clung to the air, and somewhere in the distance the aviary door creaked in the wind. As Poirot re-entered the hall, Miss Verity brushed past him, clutching a folder and muttering to herself. Her usually severe bun had come loose, and her eyes darted nervously. "Miss Verity," Poirot called gently. She froze, then turned. "Yes, Mr. Poirot?" "A quick word. That folder, may I?" She hesitated, then handed it over.
Poirot flipped through the pages, logbooks, estate expenses, visitor records, and something else. Tucked at the back was a single sheet of parchment written in a different hand. In the event of my untimely death, I urge that the matter not be closed hastily. I have reason to believe my affairs may be interfered with, and that my final intentions may be obstructed. Poirot looked up. "Did you read this?" Verity's lips trembled. "I didn't mean to, I only, after her fall, I couldn't stop wondering. She asked me days before to take the birds' ledgers out of the study. She didn't want Philip seeing them." "Why not?" "She said they held truths no one would expect." Poirot closed the folder gently. "Miss Verity, you may have just opened the door to the very heart of this mystery." Chapter 12. The Ledger of Lies. The private wing of Renfield Hall was unusually quiet that evening. A hush seemed to have fallen over the estate, no doubt in response to the subtle but growing sense that Hercule Poirot was inching ever closer to some unseen truth. As twilight deepened outside, Poirot remained in the small library near the east corridor, poring over the folder Miss Verity had surrendered to him. On the table lay the ledgers Lady Evelina had asked to be removed from her study. Neatly bound, stamped with the Renfield crest, and organized by year, they detailed the financial upkeep of the aviary, including food logs, visitor registries, breeding records, and something altogether more peculiar. He flipped to the section dated 3 months prior. At first glance it was mundane: bird feed expenses, vet visits, replacements of old perches. But then Poirot noticed a recurring name in the daily entries, R.S. initials, that were curiously absent from the list of staff members Eleanor had provided earlier. R.S. checked night locks on finch cages, reported disturbance near violet wing nest. R.S. removed damaged sheet from skylight dome, claimed wind exposure. R.S. key request logged for secondary aviary gate. The entries were meticulous, even obsessive, yet the identity behind the initials remained elusive. Poirot leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Just then Hastings entered. "I say, Poirot, the storm's about to break outside. Thunder's already rumbling?" Poirot nodded without looking up. "A fitting backdrop, mon ami. We are on the precipice of our own storm here." Hastings peered over his shoulder at the open ledger. "More bird schedules?" "No, mon cher. Something far more human. These are not just feeding logs. They are windows into opportunity and intent." Hastings frowned. "You think these entries were falsified?" "Not necessarily falsified," Poirot replied. "But they were crafted to leave a trail, one that someone thought would go unnoticed." He tapped the entry from 5 weeks ago. R.S. delivered a sealed box to Evelina's quarters. Contents marked estate materials, private. Poirot turned to Hastings. "And yet no such box was found after her death." "Could have been destroyed in the fire," Hastings suggested. "Oui, or removed before it could be." The door creaked open again, this time revealing Charles Mayhew. He looked pale. "Forgive me for barging in. I thought you should see this." He held out an envelope, slightly singed at the corner, but sealed with a broken wax stamp. Poirot stood swiftly. "Where did you find it?" "Behind the false panel in the study's bookshelf. The fire didn't reach that side." Poirot delicately peeled the envelope open. Inside, a single folded page bore Lady Evelina's handwriting. "To whom it may concern, should I perish before amending my will formally, let it be known I entrusted the new document to someone loyal, though not legally authorized. It is my intention to sever Philip from the majority inheritance, favoring the Royal Wildlife Conservancy. The document is hidden where the sky listens and wings are never locked." Hastings blinked. "The sky listens." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "A riddle, and a precise one." Mayhew exhaled. "What does it mean?" Poirot turned slowly toward the window, where rain now pattered against the glass. "The sky listens, and wings are never locked. Where is the one place in Renfield Hall that fits such a description?" "The aviary," Hastings answered, realizing dawning. "Oui," Poirot said. "Specifically the upper dome, vented, open to the elements, and inaccessible to anyone without the secondary gate key, which, as it happens, was requested by our mysterious R.S. Mayhew's face went ashen. "Then someone's hidden the revised will up there?" Poirot nodded. "Or destroyed it. But I do not believe that is the case." He picked up the ledger once more. "We must discover who R.S. is. Their presence in these entries is no coincidence." "Could it be a servant?" Hastings asked. "None on record with such initials," Poirot replied. "And Miss Verity assures me she manages all staffing personally." At that moment, the housekeeper, Mrs. Flint, appeared in the doorway. Her eyes swept the room, then landed on the ledger. "You found the old aviary logs, sir?" Poirot looked up. "Do you know about them?" "I was told to stop updating them after Mrs. Renfield took ill. A new assistant had been brought in, one she'd hired personally. Quiet lad, always wore gloves, red hair." Poirot stood very still. "A red-haired assistant?" "Yes, sir. I never caught his name, just that he signed his deliveries with initials." R.S. Poirot narrowed his eyes. "Thank you, madame. That is most illuminating." As Mrs. Flint left, Poirot closed the ledger and turned to Hastings. "Now we are very close, my friend. This assistant vanished after Lady Evelina's death. No mention, no dismissal records." Hastings frowned. "You think he was involved?" Poirot tapped the ledger thoughtfully. "No, I believe he was a witness, perhaps even a messenger. But if someone knew he held the secret of the will, they may have silenced him or tried to." He rose, the storm now in full crescendo outside. "Tomorrow," Poirot said firmly, "we ascend into the aviary dome, and we shall see if the sky still listens." Chapter 13. Beneath the Listening Sky. The next morning broke with a restless kind of stillness, the storm having passed in the night but leaving behind a sky mottled with bruised clouds. The estate's aviary loomed in the distance like a glass cathedral, its domed ceiling catching the weak morning light. Hercule Poirot, dressed immaculately as ever in a dark grey suit and spats, made his way across the dew-laced garden path, accompanied by Hastings and the ever-dutiful Miss Verity. "Are you quite certain about climbing up there, Poirot?" Hastings asked, glancing at the spiralling steel stairwell that led to the dome's upper observation deck. "Mais oui," Poirot replied. "Where the mystery leads, we must follow, even if it requires a modest effort of the legs." He glanced at his patent leather shoes with a slight grimace. Miss Verity walked briskly ahead, unlocking the aviary's secondary gate, a narrow, seldom-used entrance beside the eastern greenhouse wall. "I've arranged for the upper dome to be opened," she said. "The maintenance hatch is small but stable." They stepped into the main enclosure. The air inside was thick with the scent of orchids and damp earth, and the soft fluttering of wings echoed in the vaulted space. Exquisite birds flew overhead, canaries, lorikeets, green-winged macaws, swooping gracefully between foliage and hanging feeders. It was a world unto itself, serene and strange. Poirot observed the vast aviary dome with appreciation. "It is like a temple to beauty, no? But even temples have secrets." They reached the foot of the spiral stairs that led to the catwalk girding the upper structure. Miss Verity handed Poirot a flashlight. "The dome hatch is up there," she said, lowering her voice. "That's where Lady Evelina liked to spend her final hours." She said the birds reminded her of dreams, always just out of reach. As they ascended, Poirot paused periodically, eyes scanning every bolt and beam. The air grew thinner, and the birds seemed more distant, like a melody fading into silence. At the top, the narrow observation walkway creaked faintly under their steps. A panel of reinforced glass jutted outward, a skylight, hinged and slightly ajar. Poirot knelt before the panel and carefully pressed it open. A gust of cool air swept in, ruffling his hair. "It appears someone has been here recently," he murmured, pointing to faint scuff marks on the metal sill. "And see, there, tucked behind the vent." He reached in delicately with gloved fingers and extracted a bundle wrapped in oilskin. It was sealed with wax and bound with ribbon, its tag faded but unmistakably handwritten. Evelina Renfield, Revised Testament. Hastings let out a low whistle. Good Lord, she really did leave a new will. Poirot gave a slight nod. And she hid it where no one would think to look unless they understood her riddles. He turned the package over, inspecting the wax. Unbroken. That is...
Something. Suddenly a noise echoed from below, metal clanging against metal. Poirot froze. Hastings leaned over the railing. "Someone just closed the main aviary door!" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "So, we are not alone." They descended quickly but cautiously. As they reached the lower floor, a figure emerged from the eastern ferns, startled, breathless. It was Dr. Lionel Farrow. I didn't know anyone was inside," he stammered. "Miss Verity said the aviary was off limits this morning. I came to check on the macaws. They were due for medication." Poirot studied him with great care. "The birds will have to wait, Doctor. We have just retrieved something most valuable, Lady Evelina's revised will." Farrow's expression flickered. "Revised? That's unexpected." "Indeed," Poirot said, stepping closer. "And yet I detect no surprise in your voice, Monsieur Farrow." Before the doctor could reply, Charles Mayhew entered through the main door, drawn by the raised voices. "What's going on?" Poirot lifted the oilskin-wrapped parcel. "The will, Monsieur Mayhew. It exists. Hidden in the one place the sky could listen and wings would not be locked." Mayhew took the bundle gently. "I'll have this verified immediately. This changes everything." Farrow adjusted his collar. "If it's authentic, Philip's inheritance will be void." Poirot raised a brow. "Hey, that troubles you?" Farrow hesitated. "No, of course not. I'm only concerned with ensuring Lady Evelina's wishes are honoured." Poirot said nothing, but his eyes lingered on the doctor's gloved hands, his left palm smeared faintly with something dark. Oil or ink, perhaps, or something else. As the group exited the aviary, Poirot remained behind for a final glance upward. The birds continued their circuits in the dome above, silent witnesses to secrets, carried only on wings and whispers. Hastings turned to him. "What now?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Now, mon ami, we wait. The net has been cast, and very soon one of our suspects shall attempt to wriggle free." Chapter 14. The Trap of Gentle Words. Late afternoon, sunlight dappled the drawing room in warm amber as the household settled into an uneasy quiet. News of the newly discovered will had not yet been disclosed to all, but Poirot, true to form, had wasted no time beginning his next manoeuvre. He requested tea be served in the drawing room and asked, most politely, for each remaining guest to join him. There was no hint of confrontation, only the charm of a man offering civil conversation. But Hastings knew better. Poirot's traps were rarely sprung by force. They were coaxed with courtesies, baited with kindness, and sprung with a smile. Lady Gwendolen was the first to arrive, swathed in silks and suspicion. She took her usual seat by the window, where the light flattered her already theatrical posture.
Miss Verity followed, her composure impeccable, though her eyes betrayed restless calculation. Dr. Farrow entered next, more subdued than usual, his fingers still bearing traces of the oily substance Poirot had noted earlier. Then came Philip Renfield, recently restored from his illness, still pale, but watching Poirot warily, as though expecting his inheritance to be pried from his grasp. Finally, Charles Mayhew arrived last, carrying a leather folder, the suspected will secured within. He gave Poirot a subtle nod and took a discreet place by the fire. Once all were assembled, Poirot stood with an almost imperceptible sigh, his hands clasped lightly before him. "My friends," he began, "you are all fatigued, I am sure. So many unpleasant events, a tragic death, mysterious disappearances, whispers of fraud and fear, but I ask for your patience a little longer, for the truth, like the peacock in the garden, hides until properly enticed." Hastings suppressed a smile. Poirot did love his metaphors. "I wish to speak," Poirot continued, "not of accusations but of psychology, for I believe that it is not in the evidence alone where the truth lies, but in human behaviour, in the little moments, the little lies." Lady Gwendolen sipped her tea with deliberate grace. "Is this a parlour game, Monsieur Poirot?" He gave her a knowing look. "Perhaps, but one with very serious consequences." Poirot turned slightly. "Miss Verity, do you recall the story Lady Evelina once told of the canary who refused to sing when its mate was caged?" Verity hesitated. She told that often. She believed freedom was vital to the soul. "Ah," Poirot nodded. "And yet she felt caged herself, did she not? A life shaped by duty. In such cases one makes plans in secret." Verity's brow furrowed, but she said nothing. Poirot pivoted. "Monsieur Philip, did you ever read the original will, or only what your mother told you of its contents?" Philip blinked. She told me I was the sole heir, of course. Why would I doubt that?" "And yet," Poirot said gently, "Lady Evelina made recent visits to a solicitor in Devonshire. Quietly, without informing her son. Curious, no?" "She was entitled to," Philip said stiffly. "That doesn't imply deceit." "Ah, but it implies intent." Poirot turned to Mayhew. "You, monsieur, have now reviewed the revised testament?" Mayhew cleared his throat. "Yes, it's valid. Signed, witnessed. In this version, the estate is to be divided equally between Miss Verity, Dr. Farrow, and a conservatory trust." There was a ripple of shock in the room. Even Verity looked stunned. Lady Gwendolen set her teacup down sharply. "So, Philip is disinherited entirely?" "Oui," said Poirot calmly. "Entirely." Philip sprang from his chair. "That's ridiculous. That's forgery." Poirot held up a hand. "No, monsieur, it is quite real, and yet I do not believe the matter of the will is our greatest mystery." The room fell into a cold hush. "Our true puzzle," Poirot continued, "is the escape from the aviary, and the disappearance of the original will, and the curious circumstance of the tampered skylight, and, most importantly, the emotional tremor I observed in one person when a particular name was mentioned." Everyone leaned forward. "I refer," Poirot said softly, "to Eleanor Briar. The woman Lady Evelina was dismissed from the household 6 months ago, a woman whose letters I found burned in the study's fireplace, and a name that caused our good doctor to drop his glass last night." All eyes turned to Dr. Farrow. He paled visibly. "That was coincidence?" Farrow muttered. "I knew Eleanor, briefly." Poirot approached him with quiet grace. "Briefly, but not unimportantly. And you feared the new will might mention her, perhaps even include her, or perhaps it referenced a truth you hoped would remain buried." Farrow's lips parted, but no sound came. Poirot's voice softened. When people lie, Monsieur Poirot, they avoid the truth. But when they are desperate, they begin to tamper with the world around them, hide documents, mislead others, and sometimes kill. The doctor's hands trembled. Poirot turned away abruptly. But I do not accuse yet. I only observe. And soon the person responsible will reveal themselves. He bowed politely to the room. Merci. That will be all, for now. As the guests rose, murmuring and exchanging glances, Poirot turned to Hastings. The house grows restless, mon ami. The soul of the murderer quivers like a string too tightly wound, and when it snaps, it shall be unmistakable. Chapter 15. A voice in the night fell over Renfield Hall like a velvet curtain. The clouds had finally cleared, revealing a silvered moon that bathed the estate grounds in pale luminescence. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, a solitary cry in the stillness. Inside, the house was quiet but uneasy. Hastings paced slowly by the billiard room, waiting for Poirot, who had withdrawn after tea to his guest quarters. The detective had said nothing more after the drawing-room confrontation, but Hastings recognized the silence for what it was, the final tightening of the net. At precisely 11:30, Poirot emerged from the hallway, impeccably composed as always. "The time has come, mon ami," he said, voice low. "We must listen for the sound that always follows the shuffling of secrets." "What are we expecting?" Hastings asked. Poirot smiled faintly. "Not what, my friend? Who?" They made their way down the narrow corridor leading toward the eastern wing, the oldest part of the house, long disused except for storage. Miss Verity had mentioned that Lady Evelina's personal effects were moved here after her death, including boxes of correspondence and private papers. It was here, Poirot suspected, the killer might return. They waited behind the heavy velvet drapes lining the hallway's recess, just past the half-shuttered window. The silence was thick. Every board creak and breeze became a drumbeat in the ears. Then footsteps, light, careful, deliberate. Poirot held a hand out, palm downward. Hastings froze. A figure moved into view, a shadow cloaked in a long coat, head lowered. It was not until the person turned toward the side room that the moonlight revealed their face. Dr. Lionel Poirot. He moved quickly, unlocking the storeroom door with a key, one presumably taken from Verity's ring, and slipped inside. Poirot waited a breath longer, then stepped from behind the curtain with uncanny quiet. Hastings followed. Inside the small room, shelves loomed with boxes, old hat boxes, yellowing ledgers. Poirot stood by a writing desk, a lantern burning beside him. His back was turned, but his hands were rifling through a pile of envelopes. "Looking for something, Doctor?" Poirot said gently. Poirot spun around, face blanching in the lantern's glow. I came to protect Evelina's legacy," he said hurriedly. "There are letters here. She trusted me with them. Things that shouldn't be made public." "Or things that would incriminate you?" Poirot asked, stepping closer. Poirot looked away. "She was fond of me, yes, but nothing improper happened." "Except perhaps your involvement in her revised testament?" Poirot asked, tilting his head. "And your knowledge of Eleanor Briar, whom Evelina dismissed under suspicious circumstances." Poirot's jaw clenched. That was her decision. I had nothing to do with that woman's dismissal. Poirot nodded toward the letters. "Yet you come in the night to search for her belongings. Why?" The silence stretched. Finally, Poirot sat heavily in the worn chair, his voice hollow. "Because I thought I could fix it, before the others found out. Evelina. She was planning to expose Philip, financial misdeeds. She had documents drawn up, threatening to cut him off entirely. But someone found out before the will was delivered." Poirot raised a brow. "And you?" I wanted to protect her. I advised caution, but someone else acted more decisively. There it was, a shift in tone, a distancing. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Who, Doctor? Whose footsteps did you hear in the aviary that night? Whose shadow you mistook for a bird's wing? Poirot swallowed hard. I heard someone on the upper catwalk, after hours. I thought it was Philip, but when I called out, there was no reply, just silence. Poirot stepped closer. And yet you did not tell the police. Pourquoi? I was afraid, Poirot whispered, afraid that Evelina's intentions would die with her, that everything she fought to protect would vanish under scandal. Poirot nodded. So instead of revealing what you knew, you tried to control the aftermath, destroyed letters, hide facts, protect yourself. Poirot gave a bitter laugh. Do you
really think I killed her? Poirot's expression was unreadable. No, but I believe you know who did. Before Poirot could reply, the door creaked. Miss Verity appeared in the doorway, candle in hand. I thought I saw light, she said. Then, seeing Poirot and Poirot, she paused. What's happening? Poirot turned to her slowly. Mademoiselle, this room holds more than letters. It holds motives, fear, and perhaps redemption. Her face was pale but calm. I have nothing to hide, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot smiled, almost kindly. That, mademoiselle, is what we are about to discover. He gestured to the box on the table. Because this box contains something that was never meant to be found. A confession. A letter Evelina never posted. Miss Verity's eyes flicked briefly to the lid, too briefly. Poirot caught it. So did Hastings. Poirot rose slowly, his voice barely audible. Then it's over. Poirot gave a quiet nod. Not quite. Tomorrow morning, we gather everyone once more. The truth is, it is nearly here. And I believe the final mask will fall. Chapter 16. The Gathering Storm. The next morning dawned with a strange electricity in the air. Though the skies were bright, a weight hung over Renfield Hall, something unspoken, as though the very walls waited to breathe again. Poirot had requested that everyone gather in the solarium after breakfast, and now the household sat in an uneasy semicircle of velvet chairs and stiff-backed tension. Poirot stood near the tall windows, hands behind his back, eyes scanning each face. Hastings, ever watchful, stood by a small side table with a notebook in hand. On the low table before them sat the recently recovered oilskin packet, the revised will of Lady Evelina, and a weathered envelope marked in delicate handwriting. For verity, if I do not wake. Philip Renfield sat with his legs crossed, one hand twitching against the arm of the chair. His cravat was impeccable, but his eyes were rimmed red. Beside him, his wife Camilla stared ahead with a cold, unreadable face, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Dr. Lionel Farrow sat off to the right, shoulders slouched, every motion small and cautious. Miss Verity stood near the door, poised but pale, her eyes flitting occasionally toward Poirot with anxious curiosity. Poirot stepped forward. Mes amis, he began, voice measured, we are gathered not merely to discuss a document, but to bring clarity to a night that has long been shrouded in confusion and deception. The death of Lady Evelina was ruled natural, and yet I have always said, nature may be mimicked by the hand of man. A rustle moved through the room. He tapped the envelope with a single finger. This letter, written and sealed by Lady Evelina before her death, suggests she feared for her life. That is no small matter. And then there is the revised will, hidden not in a drawer, but in the dome of the aviary, wrapped and sealed as though she knew someone might try to ensure it was never found. Philip leaned forward.
Surely you're not implying foul play based on mere speculation, Monsieur Poirot? Speculation? Poirot smiled slightly. Non, monsieur. Observation. He began to pace slowly between the chairs. Lady Evelina was not merely eccentric. She was calculating. Each word, each gesture, meant to protect something, or someone. He turned to Verity. Mademoiselle Verity, you were closest to her. Confidant, caretaker, companion. And yet, when I asked about Evelina's final weeks, you were restrained. Verity straightened. She trusted me. I kept her confidence. Poirot nodded, including her suspicion that someone within this very room had reason to wish her silenced. A pin could have dropped. Poirot turned toward Camilla. Madame Renfield, your relationship with your mother-in-law was strained, was it not? Camilla raised a brow. We had differing views. That is not a crime. No, Poirot said, but it is interesting that the original will benefit your husband exclusively, and that you both stood to gain greatly if the revised version was never found. Philip shifted uncomfortably. Are we really doing this? Poirot raised a hand. Oui, monsieur, because there is one detail none of you have yet considered. The birds. He walked to the corner where a small cage rested, housing a single grey parrot. Lady Evelina's birds are creatures of habit, and one, this one, has developed a fascinating phrase it repeats every morning at sunrise. He leaned closer to the cage. Say it again, mon petit. The bird cocked its head and croaked. Too high. Too high, don't please. Silence. Poirot turned, his voice now sharper. This bird repeats the final words it heard echoing in the aviary dome the night Lady Evelina died. Witnesses are not always human, you see. Gasps circled the room. Miss Verity took a step forward, voice trembling. That's not possible. It could be mimicking anything. Perhaps, Poirot said. But then there is the matter of the fingerprints, recovered from the skylight's interior sill. And the silk thread we found, caught in the hinge, matching a dressing robe not worn by the late Lady Evelina, but by someone else in this room. He turned to the fireplace where a robe now hung over the mantel. This one was hidden in a trunk in the eastern wing. Monogrammed, subtle, but not enough. He looked toward the corner of the room. Camilla, Poirot said softly, would you care to explain why your robe was found at the scene of your mother-in-law's death? Camilla's mouth tightened. She stared at the robe, then back at Poirot. You've made a mistake. Poirot stepped closer. No, it was you who made the mistake. The skylight was closed too quickly. You believed the bird cries would cover her voice, and in the dimness you did not see the parrot's perch so near. But the bird heard and remembered. Hastings blinked. Good heavens! Poirot turned fully to Camilla. The motive is as old as time. Inheritance, resentment, control. But the means, that was clever. You administered a combination of herbs, untraceable in a woman with a weak heart. You confronted her beneath the dome and locked the door behind you. When she collapsed, you fled through the skylight. Camilla rose slowly, gaze locked with Poirot's. You can't prove that. Poirot bowed his head. No? Then perhaps the letter in that envelope, her final one, will prove it for me. I have not read it, but I believe it begins with your name. He turned to Miss Verity. Would you do the honours, mademoiselle? With trembling hands, Verity took the envelope and carefully opened it. Chapter 17. The letter unfolds. Verity's fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal on the weathered envelope. The solarium had fallen so still that even the gentle rustling of paper echoed like a thunderclap. Her lips parted to read, but Poirot gently raised a hand. "If I may, Mademoiselle Verity," he said, softly, stepping forward with a nod. "Some things are best heard from a neutral tongue." Relieved, Verity passed the letter to him, and Poirot held it up before the assembly. His eyes moved quickly over the script, and a subtle sadness crept into his expression. "This," he said, "is not merely a letter of farewell. It is a confession and a warning." He began to read. "To Verity, if you are reading this, then my instincts were correct, and I have not lived to see the morning light. You have been a light in my later years, dear girl, but you must be brave now, for I fear the shadows in this house have deepened beyond repair. I suspected someone close to me was tampering with my medicines. Small things at first, unfamiliar flavors in my tea, slight dizzy spells. I had Lionel examine the vials discreetly, and though he found nothing amiss, I could tell he was uneasy. I believed it was Camilla, or perhaps Philip. He has grown desperate since his losses in the city, but I cannot rule out others. Felix has debts. Theodora, well, she resents that I never funded her expedition. Even Giles has been strange of late. The sermon on death and judgment last week chilled me. I have revised my will to protect you, Verity. I know what this household will say, that I have been swayed by sentiment. Let them. I have wrapped the will and hidden it in the dome's lattice-work. I fear the drawing-room is too obvious a place. If I fall suddenly, do not trust the explanation. I have lived long enough to know when death is natural and when it is not, and mine, I fear, will not be. Evelina." When Poirot lowered the letter, no one moved. Camilla had gone pale, her once crisp poise now slackening under the weight of the words. Philip's brow furrowed in disbelief, while Lionel sat with hands knotted. Together his jaw clenched. "She feared all of us," Verity whispered, eyes glassy. "She feared someone," Poirot corrected gently. "But she could not identify them with certainty. And so she laid a net of clues, not just the will's location, but the birds, the letter, and you, Mademoiselle Verity, as her final safeguard." Camilla suddenly stood. "You can't possibly believe this letter condemns me. It names 5 people. Poirot turned toward her. "But the letter confirms the motive, and it supports a narrative, one that aligns with the physical evidence we now possess. You see, Lady Evelina was not as paranoid as some believed. She was preparing for her own murder." Camilla's voice cracked. "This is ludicrous. We all had reasons to be angry at her. You just want a tidy ending." Poirot tilted his head slightly. "No, I want the truth. The tidy ending, as you call it, is often the work of fiction, but truth, it leaves marks." He stepped toward her again, gently but firmly. "The robe, the footprints on the dome glass, the herbal compounds found in the teacups Miss Verity poured but never drank. You dosed her slowly, didn't you? Testing reactions, gauging her health. And when she grew suspicious and confined herself to the aviary, you grew desperate." Camilla was silent now, her hands at her sides. Philip reached for her, but she stepped away. "You wanted the estate," Poirot continued. "You feared losing everything if Verity inherited. So you visited the aviary that night, under the pretense of reconciliation. She was weakened. You raised her voice against her own. And when she collapsed," Camilla exhaled slowly, "it wasn't supposed to kill her, just frighten her, humble her." Poirot's brows rose. "But it did kill her, and you fled. And fate, Madame Renfield, has a curious sense of timing, for in your escape you awakened a witness with no sense of loyalty, only mimicry." The parrot squawked again, as if on cue. "Too high! Don't! Please!" The voice echoed across the solarium, unmistakably feminine, unmistakably distressed. Poirot walked to Camilla and offered a long, thoughtful gaze. "You will say, of course, that it was all circumstance, that Lady Evelina's health was delicate, her suspicions delusional. But the birds tell a different tale. And when a living voice fails, sometimes it is the echo that remains to deliver justice." A silence fell. At last, Philip stood, voice low. "I didn't know." "I believe you," Poirot said. "You may have benefited, but that does not make you complicit." Camilla turned to her husband, but whatever plea had formed on her lips withered in the silence. Hastings cleared his throat. "So what now, Poirot?" Poirot folded the letter and handed it to Verity. "Now," he said, "we leave the truth to the proper authorities. And Lady Evelina may finally rest in peace." Chapter 18. The Final Perch, The Dawn That Broke Over. Larchmore Estate was quiet, without ceremony. A thin veil of mist still clung to the hedgerows, as if reluctant to release the memory of what had transpired within the house. The aviary remained locked, its glass walls dim with morning dew, and a silence that no bird dared break. Poirot stood in the drawing-room, a small suitcase beside him, his silhouette framed by the French doors. Hastings entered quietly, his tie slightly askew, fatigue lining his usually steady expression. "It's over, then," Hastings said, almost as if asking permission to believe it. Poirot nodded gently. "Oui, mon ami. Justice, though sometimes as delicate as the feather, always finds its balance." Verity appeared in the doorway, her eyes clear but solemn. She carried a small envelope, this one unsealed, its purpose not hidden, but fulfilled. "The solicitor arrived an hour ago," she said. "They've retrieved the amended will. Everything is in order. Lady Evelina truly did leave everything to me." "And what will you do with it?" Poirot asked, his tone warm but measured. "I'll restore the estate. Use the inheritance to open a sanctuary for birds and perhaps for people too, those who need shelter." She glanced toward the garden, her voice softening. "I think she would have liked that." Poirot's eyes twinkled, but he said nothing. From the upper hall, a muffled commotion arose, the creak of boots, the hushed voices of constables, and the click of handcuffs. Camilla was being taken into custody. She descended the staircase with her chin held high, but her expression betrayed a storm beneath. Anger, sorrow, pride, undone. She paused at the foot of the stairs, her gaze locking with Verity's. For a moment neither woman spoke. Then Camilla said, "She always loved you more." Verity didn't flinch. "Because I never needed to be cruel to feel important." Camilla turned away. When the door shut behind the officers, the quiet was startling. Poirot reached into his coat and removed a silver pocket watch, checking it against the ticking grandfather clock. "There is something I must still do," he said. "One final visit." The aviary. Later. That morning Poirot entered alone, the key turning with a soft click. The scent of lavender and brass polish hung in the air. Feathers, once scattered, had been swept into a neat pile in the corner, as though someone had made peace with chaos. He walked to the base of the central stair, where Lady Evelina had fallen. Then, slowly, he ascended. The upper platform creaked faintly beneath his weight. Here the full scope of the aviary revealed itself, a world of flight caged by design, yet beautiful in its precision. From the rafters above, the Fabergé finch still hung in its hidden perch, a gleam of gold and ruby visible behind a patch of vines. Poirot reached up carefully, extracting the delicate object. "A symbol of power," he murmured, "but also of illusion." He studied it for a long moment, then descended. At the foot of the stair, the parrot gave a squawk. Too high! Don't, please! Poirot turned to it, nodding gently. Yes, mon ami, but she knew. She always knew. The departure. By midday, Poirot and Hastings stood once again on the platform at Larchmore's modest train station. The distant whistle of the 12:05 bound for London echoed across the rolling hills. Hastings adjusted his overcoat. It's strange, Poirot. This case. It wasn't just about murder or inheritance, was it? Poirot smiled slightly. No, my friend. It was about fear, the fear of being forgotten, of losing control, of not being seen. In the end, Lady Evelina tried to keep the birds caged, the family orderly, the estate untouched. But life, like birds, resists being trapped. And the finch? A red herring, perhaps, or a mirror? The Fabergé finch was just a trinket, yet it set the stage for a far graver tragedy. Camilla believed it was power. Evelina believed it was a gift. In truth, it was only beautiful, and beauty is no shield against treachery. The train rumbled closer. Poirot turned to Hastings. And what shall we do next, mon ami? Well, Hastings said with a tired grin, something simpler, I hope. Perhaps a stolen painting? No haunted birds this time? Poirot chuckled. Ah, but you must admit the Aviary did provide an atmospheric stage. He tipped his hat toward the fading estate. Goodbye, Lady Evelina. May your birds sing freely now. As the train pulled away, the last thing Hastings saw from the window was Verity in the distance, standing by the rose trellis with an open cage in her hands. A single dove took flight into the pale afternoon sky, its wings catching the light like glass.